more appropriate response rather than referring to a separate branch of government. I think clearly this subpoena this effort does not comply with the rules, with the four-pronged test of the Missouri standard, with the required consultation. It's defective, and therefore it leads me to the strong suspicion that there is a political purpose for this. At this point, I would like to yield to my colleague from California, Mr. Swalwell.
I thank Ms. Lofgren. I can't let go that one of my Republican colleagues just stated that the boxes containing national security secrets that were seized at Mar-a-Lago were stored in a safe manner, quote, stored in a safe manner. This is the bathroom at Mar-a-Lago with over a dozen boxes of national security secrets that were stored in a safe manner. My friends, you are living on Fantasy Island. That's where cults live, so that makes sense. But this bathroom is a mess. This committee has been a mess, and this Congress is a mess. This is not stored in a safe manner. It's delusional to say that. But let's talk about the witness you're seeking to hold in contempt today, because that person is a ghostwriter. That's where we have now landed in this long investigation. We're going to hold in contempt a ghostwriter. And why are they seeking a ghostwriter? Because they have literally run out of people to support their baseless, false, completely meritless allegations. I'll walk you through some of them. We saw in this committee Durham. Mr. Durham was brought here. He was appointed by Donald Trump, kept on by the Biden administration, and he brought 0 indictments against any of the people you alleged had done anything wrong. Then we had Mr. Hur, who was appointed by President Trump, kept on for the investigation of the mishandling of classified documents by the Biden administration, and said there was 0 legal wrongdoing by President Biden. You wouldn't let Hunter Biden testify in public. You did it in a secret location that the public was never able to see. That transcript didn't go so well for you, so you never brought him back in public. Then you had Devin Archer testify, and he said that there was no evidence of wrongdoing by Joe Biden. You brought in Tony Bobulinski, a person who would best be remembered for suing his cancer-ridden father's charity. Then there was Alexander Smirnov, who had the smoking gun about all of the Biden corruption. He's not available because he has been indicted for being an agent of the Russian government. There was Mr. Gall Luft. I'm sorry, he also can't be here today to help you because he was indicted for being a Chinese agent. Then my favorite, and you could say this is when you jumped the shark, is when you had Jason Galanis testify from prison. You zoomed a guy in from prison to try and support your investigation. Guys, in baseball, you get 3 outs and the inning's over. In football, you get 4 downs and then it's over. You're out of outs, you're out of downs. And as far as we're concerned, President Biden has been acquitted and it's game over. And I yield back to Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you for yielding back, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we've sat here today, we've listened to our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have a lot of descriptions for this hearing. It has been referred to today as a sham, as a waste of time, as a political stunt. The motives of the members of this committee and the purpose for this hearing have been impugned over and over again, and it could not be further from the truth. First, let's begin by reviewing the reality of the report of Special Counsel Hur, and it was not an exoneration of President Biden. It certainly was not an acquittal of President Biden in any sense of the word. In fact, it was the opposite. That report presented evidence, presented conclusions that not only did President Biden possess classified documents that he was not lawfully entitled to have, that he handled them carelessly, that he shared them with others who were not entitled to understand or see or be aware of the contents of those documents. It did not conclude that President Biden acted properly. In fact, it concluded the opposite, that President Biden acted in a way over and over and over again that is contrary to our law, reckless, and contrary to the interests of our national security. What did the special counsel conclude instead? That President Biden might not be convicted by a jury because he would be perceived as a well-meaning, confused, elderly man. That is the conclusion of Special Counsel Hur. Not that there wasn't wrongdoing, but that a jury might be so taken by the confusion of a well-meaning elderly man that it would choose not to convict. And so what brings us here? The good faith efforts of this committee to identify the truth and the facts of what went on in those interviews with those documents, who saw them, what does this mean for our country? What risk has been posed to us because a president of the United States chose not to handle these documents correctly? There is a not only valid, a vital purpose to this hearing today. Moreover, when we serve a subpoena, we're just looking for compliance. And all of this about this witness and an opportunity, he's had opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to comply. And so now we have a report in front of us that recommends a finding of contempt, and as we should. Not only should we find him in contempt, that we should be unanimous about the fact that there has been a lack of compliance, and contempt in this circumstance is warranted. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield to the gentleman from North Carolina.
I thank the gentlelady. I'm struck by, as I said earlier, the saying, and I think some people will say it, you'd gag on a gnat but swallow an elephant. You're concerned about fine points of what Measures requires in terms of an accommodation process when personal information about the president is sought and how that accommodation process should occur. But you spent years trampling every norm in sight in ways that would be unimaginable. Steve Bannon, who is scheduled to report on July 1, would be interested at your solicitousness for a private citizen, long out of the picture, who, and in this case, is a firm record that he got classified information disclosed to him. So would Peter Navarro as he sits in jail. Remember that Measures arose because Democrats relentlessly pursued purely personal transactional business information about President Trump in the hands of his bookkeeper, basically, for contrived legislative purposes that were transparently political. I wonder, and as the gentleman from California aptly put it, unprecedented in American history for a major political party in control of the Justice Department to work assiduously and with great urgency, pointing at timing in relationship to the upcoming election in which their political opponent stands as the object of prosecutions across the board, and they want to make sure they get tried to maximize their political opportunity from it. And then they want to talk about the White House, we should stop everything for the White House that shows up 2 days before a hearing on a resolution to enforce contempt. It's unbelievable. I yield.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady's time has expired. Is there further discussion on the motion? Mr. Cohen.
Mr. McClintock, I have great respect for you and fondness for you and regard for you. For that reason, I will not say what I think about your statement today. It was not prime McClintock. But this hearing, and I will give credit to Fielding Mellish, who originally said this. Fielding Mellish said, in essence, this hearing is a travesty. It's a travesty of a mockery, of a sham, of a mockery, of two mockeries of a sham. And that's what this hearing is. Fielding Mellish said it many years ago, and he said it well. I'm amazed at what we've been talking about today. But I have an amendment at the desk, and that's more pertinent, I think.
Clerk will report the amendment. The gentleman from Arizona reserves a point of order.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the committee report for the resolution recommending that the House of Representatives.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment would place at page 4 between the first and second paragraphs the following language. And facts. There are serious concerns about the audio files that may be manipulated for political purposes. They want audio files. They don't need transcripts. They want Notably, in recent months, Republicans have repeatedly circulated deceptively manipulated, cheap, fake videos targeting President Biden. For example, after President Biden appeared at a D-Day commemoration ceremony in France, where I and several people from this, I think from this committee were there, but lots of people from Congress, they showed social media users circulated deceptively edited video that appeared to show President Biden attempting to sit in a chair that did not exist. However, the full video of the event shows there is a chair behind Mr. Biden, which he was promptly sat down in. On June 13th, the Republican National Committee's RNC research account, which is a fallacious name, I guess, a misappropriated name because it's not research, tweeted a deceptively edited video that appeared to show President Biden wandering off following a paratrooper demonstration during the annual Group of Seven summit in Italy. However, the full unedited video shows the president walking toward the group of paratroopers who just landed, giving them a 2 thumbs up commendation. Judiciary Republicans have even circulated their own misleading clips on social media in recent weeks. On June 18th, the official House Judiciary GOP account falsely claimed that Biden fell asleep during a performance by Andrea Bocelli at the G7 summit. I'm sure many other people would have fallen asleep as well, and maybe I would have as well, but the full video shows the president just briefly closed his eyes while listening to Bocelli sing. These and other examples create serious reason to be concerned about how Republicans and others might use highly personal information they are seeking today. There is no need for these audio tapes. We've had the Republican-appointed Mr. Hur come in and say there was no crime committed. And the fact that he said that, and he said it was because a sympathetic figure was shown by President Biden, and the jury probably wouldn't have convicted him, that's still, you're not convicted and you haven't done anything if the jury doesn't find you guilty. There has to be guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and Mr. Hur, a Republican, whom Mr. Garland kept on as the prosecutor here, the investigator, said that they didn't believe they could find and prove a case. That's what a prosecutor does, and Mr. Garland did the right thing by keeping politics out of it, and Mr. Hur did the right thing by doing what he thought was the right thing as an attorney. And here we are, and we're comparing Mr. Biden's 1 or 2 records that he had and immediately turned over to the federal government to Mr. Trump and hundreds of records stored in his bathroom and which he refused to turn over even after subpoenas, and they had to go in and get him. And then he claimed that the FBI was trying to kill him. That the FBI was trying to kill him. The FBI was just given instructions, as all FBI agents are, when you're executing a warrant, to not kill somebody. The limits of deadly force, the same limits they were told about when they went in to serve and find President Biden. So, it's just absurd, and that's why Mr. Smith is asking for some type of a judicial declaration to protect FBI officers from being subject to harassment and maybe targeting because some crazy person that thinks that Mr. Trump's life was endangered when it wasn't, of course. They knew he wasn't even going to be at Mar-a-Lago. He was going to be at somewhere else. He was in Bedminster or wherever, visiting his wife's grave, which gives them a tax deduction in perpetuity on the golf course. Slick move that was. To compare any effort to impeach the Biden family for what President Trump did by telling Zelensky, you give me the goods on Hunter Biden and I'll give you the weapons. I mean, that's impeachable and should have been. He just didn't have a jury that was politically willing to face the facts. And the same thing for trying to overthrow the government in the second impeachment trial, what about 7 or 8 or 9 Republicans did vote for conviction, but not the 16 that were necessary. And even Mr. McConnell, who said he'd done wrong, didn't have the guts to vote the truth. So regardless of that, Fielding Mellish is here with us today, and this is a travesty of a mockery of a sham, of a mockery of a, et cetera. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there a discussion on the amendment? Chair recognizes the gentleman from does the gentleman from Arizona withdraw his point of order?
Withdraw my point.
Gentleman withdraws his point of order. Chair recognizes Mr. Issa.
Thank you. I know that this debate is going to go well into the afternoon and perhaps evening. I know it's going to be filled with inaccuracies and one-sided truths. I also know that if the shoe was on the other foot, my friends on the other side of the aisle, including Mr. Cohen, would clearly be saying different things. Because I've been here long enough to know that when a shoe was on the other foot, they took the exact opposite position. We're here to do some serious work of the people, and particularly I want to thank the chairman for holding our branch in a responsible position and demanding that we meet our constitutional responsibilities and that we not simply abrogate authority to the executive branch. That isn't what our founders wanted us to do, and it isn't what my Democratic friends did during the Trump administration. So for those who continue to try to delay this into the evening, perhaps even missing the debate between the two presidential candidates, I say shame on you. Let's do the people's work. Let's assert the power and the responsibility we have as Article 1, as the overseers of an administration, and let's move on. Let's do what we would do if the shoe was on the other foot. And Mr. Chairman, thank you again for sticking up for Article 1 for Congress. And with that, I would yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question occurs on the amendment from the gentleman from Tennessee. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Who seeks recognition? Gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report.
Thank you.
Reserve a point of order.
Gentleman from California reserves a point of order.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I brought my amendment to this committee today because I believe in the First Amendment, and this committee should be committed to recognizing and respecting the rights of journalists. We cannot pick and choose when we want to abide by the rules and when we want to bend and break them. This political witch hunt has already cost the American people millions of tax dollars. And I implore my colleagues across the aisle to accept that there is no evidence supporting an impeachment or criminal offense committed by President Biden. How is this contempt resolution for Mr. Zwonitzer the best use of taxpayer dollars? It most certainly is not. There are a million other issues that we could be focused on today in this markup that will make a positive difference for our communities, but we could be talking about gun violence prevention, criminal justice reform, or we could be talking about commerce protections. Instead, we are here to undermine First Amendment protections. Almost a year ago to date, members of this very committee sat in this very room protecting journalists from disclosing records, contents of communication, documents, and information gathered and created in the course of their work when the federal government tries to compel them. That same bill, which received unanimous consent in this committee, then went on to pass on the House floor. Mr. Zwonitzer is a journalist, plain and simple. That is all that he is. He was working in his capacity as a journalist while working as a ghostwriter for the president. And according to this committee's votes at last year's markup, Mr. Zwonitzer is an innocent man who should not be subjected to this political circus. Last year, this committee, in the need to protect journalists, we did that. We worked last year to protect our journalists. What happened? What's happened since last year? Have we decided that a candidate is more important than the rights our Constitution affords us? I surely hope not, because we're all going to lose if we sacrifice the very rights that we claim to hold so dear and so high. Today, I am urging this committee to show that it is not a hypocritical one. Please don't be hypocritical in front of the American people. The powers of this committee are strong and should not be used only to protect the rights of some members that they have deemed as friends. To hold Mr. Zwonitzer in contempt today, those who vote in favor of this resolution will show the American people that you are willing to play with the rules and show an empty hand. Freedom of the press is protected whether or not we like what is being reported. Let's not make a mockery of the First Amendment in this committee today. This committee needs to respect Mr. Zwonitzer's right not to turn over his source material. And I yield.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized, and I'll come to
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I beg your pardon. You called Mr.
California withdraws his
I withdraw my amendment.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reporter's privilege is not remotely applicable to the circumstances at hand. First of all, what reporters are mainly protected from in the case where it would apply is disclosing their sources. In this case, the president may not know who Mr. Zwonitzer's source was, but everybody else does. It was the president. He was the one who read verbatim to him from classified information. Moreover, Mr. Zwonitzer may have acted at times in his life as a journalist. He was not acting as a journalist now. The reporter's privilege does not take people who have functioned as journalists at one point or another and set them apart as exempt from the ordinary processes of law applicable to every other American. It is very specific. Reporters are entitled to the reporter's privilege when they were engaged in news gathering. Mr. Zwonitzer was not doing that. He was speaking with President Biden to help President Biden write a book. He was a scrivener for President Biden. So it's irrelevant whether he may have been a reporter in some other circumstance. There is no remote connection between the reporter's privilege and the circumstances at hand. And therefore, be no hypocrisy in pursuing enforcement of the subpoena. And with that, I yield to the gentleman. I think first to the chairman.
I was just going to add one other fact. The government always got the information. Notwithstanding, he tried to destroy it. The government's got the information. They went and got it off the computer. So the part of the government that's got it's the part of the government that can prosecute him, for goodness sake. I yield back.
Another great point. And I'll also yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I'll be brief. The claim that this committee, which has protected the First Amendment as one of its most primary responsibilities, is patently simply not true. I think the most important thing that we decide here today is, will we assert the committee's jurisdiction? And that's what we're doing. Again, this committee held, for example, Harriet Miers in contempt for not showing up. She was the attorney to the president. Why did we do so? Were we ignoring attorney-client privilege? No. But actions had been taken that were not covered by it, and we sought to have the information. So I think I heard the gentlelady on her amendment. I can't begin to understand how she could conflate that, but I will predict here today that if the shoe is on the other foot in the future, she will make the opposite decision, and that is something that you should be ashamed of. Were the shoe on the other foot? By the way, just so you know, this committee, or the January 6th committee, held people in contempt and actually has incarcerated them for not being willing to say things about conversations with another president. And you know what? Those people wrote books too. And with that, I thank the gentleman and yield back.
And I thank the gentleman. I again yield to the chairman.
I'm good.
Okay. Well, it's very simple. I mean, it's a little bit reminds me of the White House's bad faith in showing up with the whole idea 2 days before the hearing. It is a contrived defense. This objection is so utterly frivolous legally as to call into question the good faith with which it is offered, and I yield time back.
Gentleman yields back. Question, gentlelady from gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. This markup is so shameful. It's craven, actually. I'm appalled that here we are again with a desperate Republican Party. Does nobody on the other side of that aisle regret what you are doing today? Does nobody see the shame-filled behavior? If you want to learn about President Biden's love of his family and his loss, read the book. Don't go after a ghostwriter. With that, I will yield the gentlewoman from Georgia my time.
Thank you so much to the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania. And talking in response to what was just mentioned, the bill that you actually voted for, in favor for, has a definition that would qualify Zwonitzer as a journalist in his capacity writing Biden's book. That was H.R. 4250, the Press Act. And the term covered journalist means a person who regularly gathers, prepares, collects, photographs, records, writes, edits, reports, investigates, or publishes news or information that concerns local, national, or international events or other matters of public interest for dissemination to the public. And I yield back to the gentlewoman.
And I yield.
Gentlelady yields back. The question occurs on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Georgia. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The roll call being requested, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Issa? Mr. Issa votes no. Mr. Gates? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes no. Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Tiffany votes no. Mr. Massey? Mr. Roy? Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes no. Ms. Spartz? Ms. Spartz votes no. Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Fitzgerald votes no. Mr. Benz? Mr. Benz votes no. Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Gooden? Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Nels? Mr. Moore? Mr. Kiley? Ms. Hageman? Mr. Moran? Ms. Lee? Ms. Lee votes no. Mr. Hunt? Mr. Fry? No. Mr. Fry votes no. Mr. Ruley? No. Mr. Ruley votes no. Mr. Nadler? Ms. Lofgren? Aye. Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson-Lee? Mr. Cohen? Mr. Cohen votes aye. Mr. Johnson? Mr. Schiff? Mr. Schiff? Mr. Schiff votes aye. Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Ms. Jayapal? Mr. Correa? Mr. Correa votes aye. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. McBath? Ms. McBath votes aye. Ms. Dean? Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Escobar? Ms. Escobar votes aye. Ms. Ross? Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush? Mr. Ivy? Ms. Ballant?
Clerk report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 9 ayes and 13 noes.
The amendment is not adopted. Question? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Wait.
The vote was closed.
Okay, the vote was closed. I'm sorry, I did not see. We've had this happen a couple of times. Question occurred.
The gentlelady, Ms. Dean.
Oh, Ms. Dean's got an amendment? Okay, I'm sorry. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report.
Amendment to the amendment.
I reserve a point of order.
Point of order
Each
reserved by the
order
gentleman from
substitute.
California.
To the committee report.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I do have to say I am once again saddened and appalled that this body and my Republican colleagues want to somehow capitalize on the worst personal tragedy that anybody in this place could imagine, the loss of a child. It is simply craven what you are pursuing today. Why are you doing this? It would seem you're doing this because of the 2 men who are involved. You don't like President Biden because he poses a political threat to your favorite felon. So they attack Biden. It's cynical, but hardly new. Now you are going after Mr. Zwonitzer simply because you are desperate. You have the weight of the government, the control of this committee. Mr. Zwonitzer is a private citizen, a writer, a journalist, trusted to convey the most private memories of a father losing a son. In Promise Me, Dad, President Biden describes the moment he knew Beau Biden would not recover, the moment Beau's breathing slowed, the moment his heart stopped beating. Finally, in his own words, he writes that his son was gone, quote, May 30, 7:51 p.m. It happened. My God, my boy, my beautiful boy. I can only imagine that Promise Me, Dad has brought solace to so many of us who know grief and loss. Mr. Zwonitzer illustrates these sensitive memories with respect and dignity, a far cry from the tone and tenor of this hearing. By demanding these files, Republicans are intruding on the most private personal recollections imaginable, and they are trying to bully Mr. Zwonitzer into helping them. What does this terrible precedent mean for future writers? Who will want to work on a sensitive subject matter and tell meaningful stories if they have no control over the conversations they had? Even more cynical, why, Chairman Jordon, are you prying into these private conversations at all? Mr. Zwonitzer already produced all the information he is seeking to Special Counsel Hur, a Republican and a former Trump administration appointee. I ask every member of this committee to stop now and really consider, why are you doing this? Is the other side incapable of decency? So, I offer an amendment. My amendment clarifies that the only possible legitimate purpose of this committee, and therefore this contempt resolution, is legislative decision-making. That's what we're here about. The purpose must not be to bolster Republican candidates' chances of victory in the 2024 election cycle, nor to seek embarrassing information about President Biden. Finally, my amendment would require that any audio files must not be released to the public, 2 points, not be released to the public, nor used in any campaign materials by members of Congress seeking re-election. Therefore, I urge my colleagues, based on what must clearly be their intent, nothing political in what they're intending here, only legislative. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment or else admit this is purely political. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman withdraws his point.
Even though it was just the opening statement being reread, I will withdraw my objection.
Yeah, the gentleman withdraws. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you want to know who's craven, shameful, despicable? It is you, Democrats. Because here's the deal. We're not asserting anything with regard to Mr. Biden's book or how it came out or anything regarding to his son. What we're talking about is
the information that he decided to reveal, which was classified and rated secret, that still remains classified and secret. You have made it about President Biden's son's tragic death and their relationship. We've not inquired into that. We're inquiring into the classified documents and information that he retained over a 50-year career in the Senate and as vice president, and then that he disclosed, in turn disclosed, to someone that he knew did not have classification status. It is you who have attempted to turn this into something that it is not. That is craven. If
Would the gentleman yield for a question? Would the gentleman yield for a question?
Would you please not interrupt me?
No, I simply
If it
asked,
is,
will you
please
yield?
don't interrupt me. If it is,
Lack of decorum.
yes, you're right, you have lack of decorum. If this is about what you claim it is about, then why did President Biden take $8 million for it? Wouldn't that be craven? The reality is, we are not asking about that. We didn't bring it up. You did. You did. We are asking for information that Mr. Zwonitzer uniquely has, and it's related to his receiving sensitive classified information from a former vice president, former senator, who had no authority but knew he had retained these documents and then disclosed those to this person who was not a journalist, but it was a ghostwriter in this instance. That I'll yield to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Tiffany.
Yeah, to the gentleman from Arizona's point, what we're seeing is a bit of a form of the heckler's veto, where you shout people down in order to suppress discussion, and in this case, to suppress important information that the American people should have before them. And I understand why the other side may want to do that, because they don't want to see this go public, because who knows what information may come out. But we will not be stymied by the heckler's veto. We will follow the information that we are legally allowed to have, and we will attempt to have the Biden Department of Justice comply with the law. I yield to the gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you. I yield to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
I think you, Mr. Biggs, in fact, I appreciate the point just made by Mr. Tiffany, that this seizing upon the deeply personal, private, agonizing personal experience in the death of Joe Biden is sought as a form of a heckler's veto, but it's actually more despicable and craven than that. Because what you don't even think about, if this is not present to your mind about why we're pursuing the information in the first place, you fail to recognize President Biden already decided to expose that to the public. It is the core of the book, as they just said. So when we go to say, we want to know what all the detail is concerning President Biden's reading verbatim from classified information about Afghanistan to the ghostwriter, the Democrats, with a unanimous repetition from the ranking member on through everyone's comments, says, well, how could you? This is despicable and craven. It is so cynical, the exploitation of that, when the information that you're specifically referring to, President Biden decided voluntarily to write a book about in exchange for $8 million. Wow. You guys, as Andy Griffith used to say, you guys beat everything. You know that? I yield back.
I yield to the remainder to the chairman.
I'm fine. The
Gentleman yields back.
gentleman yields back, the gentlelady from Texas, and then we'll come to Mr. Ivey.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I'd like to yield my time to my colleague, Ms. Dean.
And I thank you. Well, all of what was just said reveals that we've struck a nerve over on the other side, and so I'm well aware of that. What you have done here is craven. I might even pull out pusillanimous just to have some fun. But here's my question. The people who have spoken against this amendment probably you're in favor of it, because my amendment simply says this: therefore, if these audio files are obtained by the committee, no portion of the audio files shall be released to the public or used in any campaign materials by members of Congress seeking re-election. Are you all in agreement? It seems like you must be. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. And I'd like to thank you for your amendment. I am in full support of your amendment. I think it would demonstrate by our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, if they were to support your amendment, it would demonstrate that nothing about this effort is political, that it is serious fact-finding. If they oppose your amendment, then it would clearly be an admission that this is purely a political exercise. So makes perfect sense to me, very straightforward. Would you like more time?
And I thank you. I thank the gentlelady for that support of my amendment. And I'll remind everybody, anybody who's still paying attention to this, that all of the information Mr. Hur has. So why they're going after this private citizen, I'm sure it's baffling anybody watching on C-SPAN. Craven.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from California.
Thank you. I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
I'm going to ask a few questions and answer them myself because it may be the most efficient way to get the thought out. You know, Mr. Issa, isn't it true that knowingly receiving classified information that you're not cleared for is a crime? Yeah, I think so.
Objection to the form of the question. Somebody has to represent you in this scenario.
Isn't it true that, that in fact, giving out classified information you've received in a classified format is a crime? Well, yes, it is. Isn't it true that the Vice President of the United States is not entitled to declassify information? Yes, it is. Is it also true that a senator is not allowed to take and keep and declassify information on his or her own? Isn't that true? Yes, it is. I could keep going with the yes, it is, as though I was a cooperating witness, which I am. But trying to bring a little humor to this moment, folks, there's been a serious allegation that a series of crimes were committed for which the elderly man with a bad memory is not being charged. And we still have the responsibility to look at whether crimes were committed. By the way, this ghostwriter probably did commit a crime by knowingly sharing in classified information and hasn't been. Now, if the Department of Justice is going to overlook crimes and only they can, in fact, bring charges, it has never stopped this committee from looking to see whether there are crimes and re-presenting them to the Department of Justice for reasons that they should enforce. But also, quite candidly, we have some other real reasons to do it, but the most important one, quite frankly, I made out trying to have a little humor, maybe a little too much humor, but we are looking at some serious things that went on. I do think that the question of President Trump and the classified documents that are alleged that he had and whether he had declassified them or not is a legitimate question. But I equally consider the questions and answers I just made as worthwhile and important, and I would urge my colleagues to move away from the idea that this has only a political purpose when, in fact, no matter who is in the majority, no matter who's in the White House, we have a reason to support knowing whether or not classified information has been inappropriately shared. And with that, I'd yield to the chairman.
I'm good.
And I'd yield to Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Issa. I mean, this is one of the things that's been driving me crazy since the special counsel was before the committee. And it's this idea that the American people have no right to hear the tapes. And now, in the discussion we're having here today, I find myself kind of bewildered that this, the ghostwriter is somehow characterized as this babe in the woods who is sitting there taking notes based on what President Biden was telling him. If you look back at the record, February 14, 2024, approximately 6 days after the release of the special counsel Hur's report, the committee sent a letter to Zwonitzer requesting 6 categories of documents and records. On the letter's return date, February 23, 2024, Zwonitzer's attorney contacted the committee and requested the committee staff contact him to discuss the committee's request. He lawyered up. This guy lawyered up. And I think the reason he lawyered up is what Mr. Issa just referred to as this idea that there could be classified information floating around out there. And a ghostwriter has his hands on it right now. And then on February 26, 2024, during which Zwonitzer's attorney represented that, he says, I can't be there because of a personal trip. Wow. No sense of urgency, really not replying to the committee, not really concerned about meeting any of the deadlines. And then he was supposed to produce this stuff by March 8th. And then guess what happens? He doesn't do it. So, I mean, the idea that the committee was not doing the due diligence to try and work with this person, and then ultimately when he lawyered up, work with the attorney, is just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. And now we sit here having this larger discussion about the tapes themselves. The American people should be able to hear about them. When the U.S. House of Representatives has had as much discussion as we have had about this topic, the idea that these are being withheld, it's not the members of Congress, it's about whether or not the American people should be able to hear these tapes. And it's not necessarily going to be used for political purposes. I think a lot of us feel that, quite honestly, it's just something that should be disclosed. And I wish that would happen. Yield back.
Yeah, gentleman yields back. The chair now, I would just add, he may have lawyered up because he tried to destroy evidence. That might have been why he lawyered up. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Well, this is disturbing at several levels, people seeking counsel. I mean, I sit on the Ethics Committee, and I can't name any names, but there are members who have matters before the Ethics Committee, and they're represented by counsel. And
gentleman yield?
I'll say this too.
Gentleman yield?
Yes.
That's fine. I think everyone, if they want a lawyer, should get a lawyer. I'm just saying why he may have done so.
Well,
the gentleman raised that point.
Just to reclaim my time, the gentleman who spoke just before you, and you by what you said by implication are suggesting that the fact that he would retain counsel suggests that he's guilty of doing something. And just a few minutes ago, when I raised the point about members of Congress, some of whom sit on this committee, who declined to comply. Let me at least finish the statement.
Okay.
Comply with the January 6th subpoenas that were received. Many of them retained counsel. And by the way, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals says that there should be no negative implication drawn from somebody retaining counsel. And if you think about it, if you're just a regular citizen and you get a subpoena from the United States Congress, you might think you're in over your head. You know why? Because you probably are. And this is a guy who, as they say in The Godfather, this is the profession that we've chosen. We've chosen to be in the public light. But this guy's a ghostwriter. By profession, he's sought to stay out of the limelight. And here we are going to hit him with a contempt and suggest that the fact that he got an attorney to help him walk it through it means he must be guilty of something. And then just before I yield to the chair, I got to say this too. It's not like he didn't respond at all to the subpoena. His attorney wrote a letter to the committee 2 months ago almost, raising the exact same issues that the committee really hasn't dealt with, and has said, well, we only heard from the White House about it 2 days ago. But the executive privilege issues were raised in his April 12th, 2024 letter, which I moved to make part of the record by unanimous consent.
Objection.
And he also raised the reporter's privilege, which has been barely addressed, really not at all, by the committee in its rush to move forward with this. The committees have said, he waived it, but, as the White House letter pointed out, and the Mazars case was, cited in support of that, he hasn't necessarily waived it. And we really haven't tried to resolve it here. The committee's just trying to blow past it. My Republican colleagues really don't want to hash it out. They just want to move on and get it done before whatever happens at 9 o'clock happens tonight. So, you know, I want to ask us to be careful about how we move forward with this and the precedent we set. And then with just a little bit of time I got left, you know, the case in Florida against President Trump, there are provisions in here, it's paragraphs 33 and 34 of the indictment. On July 21, 2021, when he was no longer president, Trump gave an interview in his office at the Bedminster Club to a writer and publisher in connection with a then forthcoming book. 2 of Trump's staff also attended the interview, which was recorded with Trump's knowledge and consent. Trump stated, I'm jumping to paragraph 34, look what I found. This was senior military officials' plan of attack. Read it and just show it. It's interesting. Later in the interview, and it goes through a colloquy between Mr. Trump and the staffers on these things, but, you know, based on what the committee's doing today, I suppose, we should be seeking a subpoena against whoever this ghostwriter was for Mr. Trump. And if he doesn't comply, I guess the way the committee would go is you seek to hold him in contempt. I don't know that that's the path we need to go down, especially when there's live litigation going on with the matter. All I'm saying is, can't we just kind of pause and think through about what we're trying to do here and why we're trying to do it? And Ms. Dean's amendment, which nobody's really spoken much to, I mean, why wouldn't we have language in there that says we're not going to use whatever we get for political purposes? Isn't that, I mean, if you're saying the legitimate basis for seeking this information, and you have to if you're seeking criminal contempt, it can only be for non-political reasons, why wouldn't you want to say that in the report?
Gentlemen, yield?
I will yield.
Is there precedent for it? So when committees on the Hill sought the tax returns of President Trump, his business records from Mazars, did they include, make sure?
Time. Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
I think that's enough of a question.
I don't know what process.
I think we need to know.
Well, I don't know what process the committee went through for that. I don't know if there was an effort at subpoena, accommodation, and then contempt. I don't know. But I know what's happening here today with a third party, private citizen. None of this is required because the Department of Justice has all of the information you're saying you need. Yeah. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I would just point out, I think you're making our point. If what you said really did, I mean, you allege it, I don't know that it happened, where President Trump gave information to a book writer, just like President Biden did, you're making our point. President Trump's getting charged. President Biden isn't, for goodness sake. That to me is a huge, I don't know that happened. It's been alleged it's happened. We know he's getting charged. We know this happened. Special Counsel Hur told us it happened. Joe Biden said that he gave classified information to his ghostwriter.
Will the gentleman yield?
Sure.
Mr. Zwonitzer is not a defendant in this. He's not. Well, by the way, you guys have alleged basically that you think he committed criminal acts.
I've not alleged that. I'm saying what
you did actually.
Reclaiming my time. All we're saying is what Special Counsel Hur sat right there at that table and told us, Mr. Ivey. That's what we're saying. It's in his report. It's in his report. He tried to destroy the evidence. They were able to recover it, they chose not to indict.
That's right. And if you think there's a Fifth Amendment claim there, is it really appropriate for the committee to be seeking to hold him in contempt for not complying with the subpoena? I don't think so, but I'll yield back.
I yield back. Who seeks recognition? The gentlelady from, well, I'll yield to you then. We got 3 minutes, 41 seconds. Go right ahead.
I just want to, before we get to a vote on this, correct the record of what a couple of the folks on the other side of the aisle said, that they were only interested in the reading of classified documents. But really, let's take a look at literally the listing that this committee demanded. According to advance our oversight, please produce the following documents and information. All documents and communications shared between you and President Biden or his staff or representatives relating to your ghostwriting, on and on. All contracts or agreements relating to your ghostwriting. All documents evidencing payments to you relating to your ghostwriting. All audio recordings, not just what might connect to possible classification, all audio recordings of interviews or conversations between you and President Biden, all transcripts of any interviews or conversations between you and President Biden, all documents and communications between you and President Biden
That's
or
what
his
we
staff.
asked for.
Yes, except members of your committee, your side
That's
of
what
the
we asked
committee, tried to mislead the public and this markup into believing it was, oh, we just want to take a look at what was the classified
We've been clear.
Ask that Lady
We've been
Sigma
clear.
Ward be taken down.
We've been clear. We've been clear. 6 categories of information, documents and information we sought. That's what we've sought. The gentlelady stated that. God bless you for stating what we all know we asked for. I yield back. Who seeks recognition? The question occurs on the amendment from the gentlelady from Pennsylvania. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Court of vote being requested, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Issa? Mr. Gates? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes no. Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Massey? Mr. Roy? Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes no. Ms. Spartz? Ms. Spartz votes no. Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Fitzgerald votes no. Mr. Benz? Mr. Benz votes no. Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Gooden? Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Van Drew votes no. Mr. Nels? Mr. Moore? Mr. Kiley? Ms. Hageman? Mr. Moran? Mr. Moran votes no. Ms. Lee? Ms. Lee votes no. Mr. Hunt? Mr. Fry? Mr. Fry votes no. Mr. Ruley? Mr. Nadler? Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson Lee? Mr. Cohen? Mr. Cohen votes aye. Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson votes aye. Mr. Schiff? Mr. Swallow? Mr. Liu? Ms. Jayapal? Mr. Correa? Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. McBath? Ms. Dean? Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Escobar? Ms. Escobar votes aye. Ms. Ross? Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush? Mr. Ivy? Mr. Ivy votes aye. Ms. Ballant? Mr. Issa, you're not recorded. Mr. Issa votes no. Mr. Chairman, there are 8 ayes and 13 noes.
The amendment is not agreed upon. Gentlelady from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the
Report.
desk.
Reserve a point of order.
Gentleman from California reserves point of order.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a
No
substitute.
objection. The amendment will be considered as read. The gentlelady from Texas is recognized to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It has been really distressing to sit here and listen to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle during this committee markup really go after a private citizen in the way that they have gone after him. And I think this should send chills down the spine of every American to see how, in their desperation, my Republican colleagues are grasping at anyone that they can in any way try to use for their political purposes of attacking the president and his family. What has been especially distressing has been hearing my Republican colleagues talk about Mr. Zwonitzer and the deletion of his materials as though there was some nefarious intent. Like he surreptitiously tried to delete materials as though he was trying to hide information, trying to give the impression that he was basically trying to destroy evidence. And in fact, that term has been used of destroying evidence, when in fact, according to the Hur report, Mr. Zwonitzer had perfectly innocent reasons for the deletion. In his interview, Zwonitzer offered plausible, innocent reasons for why he deleted the recordings. This is all in the Hur report. First, out of concern for privacy, he had a practice of deleting all audio recordings of interviewees in his possession, and he had done so previously. Second, Zwonitzer was concerned that the materials could be hacked and published online. This concern was increased by his recent work on a book discussing a powerful cyber surveillance system known to target journalists, among other groups. While Zwonitzer admitted to being aware of the special counsel investigation, he did not say that his goal was to keep evidence from being uncovered by that investigation. Instead, he explained, when I got the subpoena and when I realized that I still had audio that I did not know I had on the laptop, I made sure to preserve that for this investigation. And he, in fact, completely cooperated in the investigation. So really, it is incredibly shameful to imply that he was trying to destroy evidence, and in fact, the feds were able to recover that information, and the report made it clear that he complied. So either my colleagues on the other side of the aisle didn't read the Hur report, which would be shocking, but unfortunately not surprising, but if they did read the Hur report and they knew that the report made it very clear that he complied, then they are just basically trying to sully someone's reputation, which is absolutely shameful. So really, this amendment clarifies that information very succinctly, and there should be absolutely no reason for anyone to vote against this amendment because it is a fact. And I would like to also enter into the record Chapter 17 of the Hur report, where this information can easily be found.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Question occurs. Gentleman withdraw.
I'll withdraw.
Withdraws his point of order. Question occurs on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Texas. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
I'd like a recorded vote.
Recorded vote being requested. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Jordon?
Nope.
Mr. Jordon votes no. Mr. Issa votes no. Mr. Gates? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes no. Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Massey? Mr. Roy? Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes no. Ms. Spartz? Ms. Spartz votes no. Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Fitzgerald votes no. Mr. Bentz? Mr. Bentz votes no. Mr. Klein? Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Gooden? Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Van Drew votes no. Mr. Nels? Mr. Moore? Mr. Kiley? Ms. Hageman? Mr. Moran? Mr. Moran votes no. Ms. Lee? Mr. Hunt? Mr. Fry? Mr. Fry votes no. Mr. Rulli? Mr. Nadler? Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson Lee? Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson votes aye. Mr. Schiff? Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Ms. Jayapal? Mr. Correa? Ms. Scanlon? Mr. Neguse? Ms. McBath? Ms. Dean? Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Escobar? Ms. Escobar votes aye. Ms. Ross? Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush? Mr. Ivy? Mr. Ivy votes aye. Ms. Ballant? Ms. Ballant votes aye. Ms. Scanlon, you're not recorded. Ms. Scanlon votes aye.
Clerk report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 8 ayes and 11 noes.
The amendment is not agreed to. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The gentleman from California reserves a point of order. The clerk will report.
Amendment to the amendment in the
Without objection, the
nature
amendment will
of...
be considered as read. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been reported that former President Trump has been livid about the fact that when he left office, he was not offered a book deal. And perhaps that is the reason why, or that's one of the reasons why we're here today. Republicans concerned about Joe Biden's book deal ignores that it is a common practice for public officials and political leaders to publish memoirs that detail their experiences and define their legacies. Numerous Trump administration officials have done so, including Jared Kushner, which makes it even more unpalatable for our dear former president. On June 16, 2021, Broadside Books, an imprint of HarperCollins, announced that it had acquired a book by Jared Kushner. And at the same time of that acquisition, Broadside described Kushner as, quote, playing a central role in the administration's most significant accomplishments, end quote, and said that his book would be definitive, thorough, and thoroughly recounting of the administration and the truth about what happened behind closed doors. Like President Biden, Kushner's memoir was written with the help of a ghostwriter who is identified in the book's acknowledgments as speechwriter Brittany Baldwin. Breaking History, which was published on August 23, 2022, paints Kushner as, quote, one of the most consequential presidential advisors in modern history, end quote, and, quote, takes readers inside debates in the Oval Office, double crosses at the United Nations, tense meetings in Arab palaces, high-stakes negotiations, and the daily barrage of leaks, false allegations, and investigations, and West Wing infighting, end quote. Members of Congress have long raised concerns about the troubling overlap between Jared Kushner's Middle Eastern business interest and U.S. foreign policy. Less than 6 months after Kushner left his role as White House advisor, his private equity firm, known as Affinity Partners, which he has no background in private equity, but still set up this business. And that business received a $2 billion investment from Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, which is a sovereign wealth fund controlled by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The circumstances surrounding the PIF's $2 billion investment in Affinity invite questions about whether the investment was a reward for official actions Kushner took to benefit the Saudi government during his time in the White House, including preventing accountability for the Saudi government ordering the brutal murder of journalist and American citizen Jamal Khashoggi. Members of this committee have made no secret of their desire to investigate Kushner's business dealings with Middle Eastern states, including Saudi Arabia, and materials created during the process of writing his memoir, including the ghostwriter's notes and audio recordings, could contain evidence that is relevant to such an investigation. And to that end, this committee intends to issue a subpoena to Kushner's ghostwriter for all materials related to Jared Kushner's memoir. There are significant financial transparency issues related to Kushner's memoir. Unlike President Biden, who publicly disclosed how much he has made through book deals, financial terms for Kushner's memoir have not been shared with the public. Moreover, campaign finance records and public reporting indicate that Save America Joint Fundraising Committee, which raises money for 2 political action committees associated with Trump, spent $158,000 buying copies of Kushner's book from Books A Million. These purchases provided direct financial and reputational benefits to Kushner and may have helped him land the #1 spot on the New York bestsellers list. Mr. Chairman, if the contempt report is going to reference President Biden's book deal, it should have this information, this additional information added in for context, and for that reason I offer this amendment. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Point of orders was withdrawn. Question occurs on the amendment from the gentleman from Georgia. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Recorded vote being requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Issa? Mr. Gates? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes no. Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Massey? Mr. Roy? Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes no. Ms. Sparks? Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Fitzgerald votes no. Mr. Benz? Mr. Benz votes no. Mr. Klein? Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Gooden? Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Van Drew votes no. Mr. Nels? Mr. Moore? Mr. Kiley? Ms. Hageman? Ms. Hageman votes no. Mr. Moran? Mr. Moran votes no. Ms. Lee? Mr. Hunt? Mr. Fry? Mr. Fry votes no. Mr. Ruley? Mr. Ruley votes no. Mr. Nadler? Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson Lee? Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson votes aye. Mr. Schiff? Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Ms. Jayapal? Mr. Correa? Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. McBath? Ms. Dean? Ms. Escobar? Ms. Escobar votes aye. Ms. Ross? Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush? Mr. Ivy? Mr. Ivy votes aye. Ms. Ballant? Ms. Ballant votes aye.
Clerk. Mr. Liu?
Mr. Liu, you're not recorded. Mr. Liu votes aye.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 8 ayes and 11 noes.
The amendment is not adopted. Who seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report. The gentleman from California reserves a point of order.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the
Without
committee.
objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Donald Trump has made a number of bizarre comments that raise serious concerns about his competency and mental acuity. During a June 9th campaign rally in Las Vegas, Nevada, Trump rambled about whether it was better to be electrocuted or attacked by a shark. And this is not the only time he's discussed sharks, Mr. Chairman. Play the shark mashup, please.
So I have an aptitude for things. You know, there is such a thing as an aptitude. I said, well, what would happen if this boat is so heavy and started to sink, and you're on the top of the boat, and you have this tremendously powerful battery, and the battery's now underwater? Do you get electrocuted or not? In other words, the boat is going down, and you're on the top, and let's say there's a shark about 10 yards over there. Would I have to immediately abandon, or could I ride the electric down? And I said, sir, nobody's ever asked us that question. By the way, a lot of shark attacks lately. Did you notice that? A lot of shark. I watched some guys justifying it today. Well, they weren't really that angry. They bit off the young lady's leg because of the fact that they were not hungry, but they misunderstood who she was. They were saying, oh, sharks, we have to protect them. I said, wait a minute, wait. They actually wanted to remove all the seals in order to save the shark. I said, wait a minute, don't you have it the other way around? It's true. And the fake news, they go, he told this crazy story with electric. It's actually not crazy. It's sort of a smart story, right? So like, you know, it's like the snake. It's a smart. When you figure what you're leaving in, right? You're bringing it in. You know the snake?
Yeah, y'all can go ahead and laugh about that. It's okay. This past weekend, Trump gave a speech at the Faith and Freedom Coalition's Road to Majority.
Time belongs to the gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, time belongs to the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you. This past weekend, Trump gave a speech at the Faith and Freedom Coalition's Road to Majority Conference, during which he claimed that trucks can drive from New York to Los Angeles without stopping. And he talked about the wounds that he received while defending religious liberty, telling the crowd, quote, "And I have the wounds all over my body. If I took my shirt off, you'd see a beautiful, beautiful person, but you'd see wounds all over me," end quote. He also advocated for creating a, quote, migrant fight league, end quote, which he apparently pitched to UFC President Dana White. I wonder if he laughed. Later that same day, during a campaign rally, Trump complained about restrictors that don't want you to have any water, and he detailed his typical haircut routine. Let's run that clip.
No water in your faucets. You ever try buying a new home and you turn on, they have restrictors in there. You want to wash your hair, or you want to wash your hands. You turn on the water and it goes drip, drip. The soap, you can't get it off your hand. So you keep it running for about 10 times longer. You're trying. The worst is your hair. I have this beautiful, luxuriant hair. And I put stuff on. And I put it in. Lather. I like lots of lather because I like it to come out extremely dry because it seems to be slightly thicker that way. And I lather up, and then you turn on this crazy shower and the thing drip, drip. And you say, I'm going to be here for 45 minutes. They put restrictors, and they put them on in places like here where there's so much water you don't know what to do with it. You know, it's called rain. It rains a lot in certain places. But no, their idea, you know, did you see the other day? They just put, I opened it up and they closed it again. I opened it, they close it. Washing machines to wash your dishes. There's a problem. They don't want you to have any water. They want no water.
Gentleman from Georgia, yield just a second.
Well, no, I want to complete my comments. It's not done to cast aspersions on the man Trump, but it is to let the American people know during this hearing, when my friends on the other side are trying to cast aspersions about President Biden's mental acuity, that there is some real evidence that we've got slippage on the part of the Republican nominee for presidency of the United States. And with that, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Sure. Gentleman from California is recognized.
My friend from
Georgia. Withdraw the point of order.
Withdraw my point of order. My friend from Georgia reminds me of that movie line delivered by Kirstie Alley. Humor. It's a difficult concept. I'll yield the balance of my time to Mr. Bishop.
I think the gentleman, I won't consume the balance, but I would say to my friend from Georgia that the live experience is so much better. You're welcome to come with me to the next Trump rally. I'm sure that would be welcome. But I would also note that it really is amazing that despite the most unprecedented, dangerous, rule of law killing, turning of the awesome power of the state to prosecute crime against that former president of the United States in order to attempt personally to destroy him. You are so far away from being able to destroy him or the American people that he can still get on the podium at rallies time after time after time and be witty and entertaining and funny and insightful. You aren't about to destroy him or the American people any more than you're about to tip over the island of Guam. I yield back.
Just real quickly, man, you all got to have a little fun once in a while. You don't get it. He's being humorous. It's a joke. He's having a good time. It's one of the reasons, and it was so eloquently said from my friend from North Carolina, through all the hell he's going through, he's still having fun, and that is why his appeal is so broad and so strong with the American people. Humor is a good thing once in a while. Just, maybe just calm down a little bit and learn to laugh a little bit. I yield back.
Well, would the gentleman yield?
Yeah, I can't. He can yield.
I'm a great proponent of humor, as the gentleman knows.
Time belongs
And I
to
know
the
it can go both ways on you as well, but the fact is, we've got repeated instances of the
I'm going to reclaim my time and simply advise my friend of the first law of holes. When you're in one, stop digging. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
I just want to bring this back to why we're here. The committee is going after a private citizen, maligning that private citizen, trying to smear a private citizen's name. And it is absolutely unacceptable to those of us on this side of the aisle. And the tactics really are reprehensible. And yet we gave opportunity after opportunity via our amendments to clean up this markup. And each one of our amendments, including an amendment by Ms. Dean, to have our Republican colleagues prove that this is not a purely political stunt, via that amendment, and that they voted that down. I had an amendment to clarify facts from the Hur report that would help clear this gentleman's name. That was voted down by the majority. And so I just think it's very important for the American people to understand what's happening here today and how dangerous and reckless this behavior is. Now with that, Mr. Johnson, do you need any more time?
No, I think this hearing has degenerated to the point where it really is not worth the time of the American people for us to continue to draw this out. The very inception of this hearing is based on trying to develop campaign material for Donald Trump. And then as soon as the truth is shown about Donald Trump, my friends stop laughing. They stop laughing on the other side of the aisle and start throwing darts and start trying to make excuses for conduct that is frankly inexcusable. It's there for the American people to sit through. If you want to listen to it for an hour, listen to it, take it all in context. It'll take you an hour and a half for some of these presentations that are done, within which these snippets are taken from. But these snippets are real. They demonstrate something to the American people, and you can try to explain it. You can try to throw darts at me for bringing it out, but the American people know me. They also know Donald Trump. They know extremism. They know inefficiency, ineffectiveness. They know vindictiveness. They know all of those extreme qualities that we really don't want to bring back to the White House, but yet here on this committee, we're doing the bidding of this gentleman. We are actually doing what he wants us to do because he didn't get a book contract, because he didn't get this, because he didn't get that. And he orders my friends to carry out vendettas, and Donald Trump has been after President Biden to show that he's a crook. He wanted to put Hillary Clinton in jail. He wants to put President Biden in jail. And if we elect extremists and those who support him, that's exactly what could happen in our democracy. So this is dead serious, but yet this hearing needs to come to a conclusion where we're trying to bully an author, a ghostwriter, to turn over audio notes that Robert Hur has listened to. You know that there's nothing there. The only reason why you want them is to make campaign ads. And we have a lot of material that we can make campaign ads out of from Donald Trump, but I don't know if it'll be necessary or not. So I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and with that, I'll yield back to her.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question occurs on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Recorded vote.
Recorded vote requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordon?
Nope.
Mr. Jordon votes no. Mr. Issa? Mr. Gates? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes no. Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Massey? Mr. Roy? Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes no. Ms. Spartz? Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Fitzgerald votes no. Mr. Benz? Mr. Benz votes no. Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Gooden? Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Van Drew votes no. Mr. Nels? Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore votes no. Mr. Kiley? Ms. Hageman? Ms. Hageman votes no. Mr. Moran? Mr. Moran votes no. Ms. Lee? Mr. Hunt? Mr. Fry? Mr. Rulli? Mr. Rulli votes no. Mr. Nadler? Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson Lee? Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson votes aye. Mr. Schiff? Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Ms. Jayapal? Mr. Correa? Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse votes aye. Ms. McBath? Ms. Dean? Ms. Escobar? Ms. Escobar votes aye. Ms. Ross? Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush? Mr. Ivy? Mr. Ivy votes aye. Ms. Ballant? Ms. Ballant votes aye. Mr. Fry, you're not recorded. Mr. Fry votes no.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 8 ayes and 13 noes.
Amendment is not agreed to. Questions on adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute. This will be followed immediately by a vote on reporting the report. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of substitute is adopted. A reporting quorum being present. The question is on favorably reporting the report as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the recorded vote being requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordon?
Yes.
Mr. Jordon votes yes. Mr. Issa? Mr. Gates? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes yes. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes aye. Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Massey? Mr. Roy? Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes aye. Ms. Spartz? Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Fitzgerald votes aye. Mr. Benz? Mr. Benz votes yes. Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes aye. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Gooden? Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Van Drew votes yes. Mr. Nels? Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore votes yes. Mr. Kiley? Ms. Hageman? Ms. Hageman votes yes. Mr. Moran? Mr. Moran votes yes. Ms. Lee? Mr. Hunt? Mr. Fry? Mr. Fry votes yes. Mr. Rulli? Mr. Rulli votes yes. Mr. Nadler? Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes no. Ms. Jackson Lee? Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson votes no. Mr. Schiff? Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Swalwell votes no. Mr. Liu? Ms. Jayapal? Mr. Correa? Mr. Correa votes no. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes no. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse votes no. Ms. McBath? Ms. Dean? Ms. Dean votes no. Ms. Escobar? Ms. Escobar votes no. Ms. Ross? Ms. Ross votes no. Ms. Bush? Mr. Ivy? Mr. Ivy votes no. Ms. Ballant? Ms. Ballant votes no.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 13 ayes and 11 noes.
The ayes have it, and the report is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. Without objection, staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. Pursuant to notice, I call up H.R. 2833, the Pretrial Release Reporting Act, for purposes of markup, and move the committee reported favorably to the House. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 2833.
Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On November 5th, 2021, Darrell Brooks Jr. was arrested and charged with felony reckless endangerment after running his girlfriend over with his car in a gas station parking lot. On November 16, 2021, Mr. Brooks was released from the custody of the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office on a $1,000 bond. 5 days later, on November 21st, 2021, Darrell Brooks drove his SUV through the annual Waukesha Christmas Parade, injuring over 50 individuals and killing 6, including an 8-year-old child. I wish that cases like these were rare, but unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, we're seeing them all too frequently. That's because liberal cities and rogue state prosecutors are seeking to limit or altogether abolish the use of cash bail. For example, after New York passed its bail reform law, recidivism rates increased for individuals who had previously violent felony offenses. A March 2023 study by researchers at John Jay College of Criminal Justice found that approximately 72% of violent felony offenders who were released without bail were rearrested. Similarly, in January 2023, the state of Illinois began implementing its, quote, safety law, which stripped judges of their ability to set cash bail and require prosecutors to provide evidence within 48 hours that provide the offender committed a crime that posed a, quote, significant threat to public safety, unquote. While it's still too early to know the full impact of this law, counties across the state, such as McHenry County, are already reporting an increase in those charged with subsequent felony offenses. Meanwhile, the city of Chicago was awarded more than $2.6 million in burn JAG grants in 2023 to support Illinois reckless bail policies. The Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is tasked with collecting, analyzing, and publishing information on crime, criminal offenders, and the operation of our justice system at all levels of government, have previously reported pretrial release of felony defendants in state courts through its National Pretrial Reporting Program, or NPRP. The most recent NPRP report is from 2007, so it's rather dated, but it it did evaluate pretrial release statistics between 1990 and 1994. I think we can all agree it's time we received updated reported data. That's why I introduced H.R. 2533, the Pretrial Release Reporting Act, which would task the Bureau of Justice Statistics to report on individuals charged with violent felony offenses who are subsequently released on bail or obtain pretrial release. I hope my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would agree that this data would be helpful informing Congress of how state and local prosecutorial decisions are impacting the safety of their communities and would hopefully prevent future tragedies like the one that occurred in Waukesha. I urge a yes vote on this bill, and I yield balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia for an opening statement is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Masquerading as a purportedly harmless reporting bill, H.R. 2833 is actually just another baseless attempt by my Republican colleagues to engage in fear-mongering about crime despite historic drops in violent crime in cities across the country. Their target this time is bail reform. The premise underlying this bill, that bail reform in cities with so-called progressive prosecutors has created a dramatic ongoing increase in violent crime, is simply not true. It's wrong. As if that weren't bad enough in trying to justify their false premise, the bill requires but does not fund a report that would be simply impossible to complete. Certainly not within the 180 days given, much less every year thereafter. Let's start with the supposed justification for this bill. It rests on the outdated and completely disproven notion that violent crime is on the rise and that bail reform is somehow to blame. But this simply is not true. With the onset of the pandemic, increases in crime were felt in communities of all sizes, political alignments, and demographics, and in states that enacted bail reform policies, and just as much or more in states that did not. And murder rates have been higher in red states than in blue states in every year in this century. More importantly, the statistics conclusively show that violent crime has been falling dramatically for more than 2 years under the Biden administration, even in states that changed the way they look at bail and pretrial release. Although the majority would like to pretend otherwise, crime rates began to drop in 2022, while 2023 featured one of the lowest crime rates in more than 50 years. And crime rates continue to fall even further in 2024. Despite what our Republican colleagues want Americans to believe, the evidence fails to show any causal connection between bail reform and crime. However, cash bail has resulted in a dramatic rise in the number of defendants who are detained pending trial, resulting in tremendous financial and social costs to defendants, their families, their communities, and taxpayers who bear the cost of incarcerating nearly 450,000 people each year who have yet to be convicted of a crime. It's not surprising that the burdens of pretrial detention fall disproportionately on communities of color and on women as well. As a result of the growing body of research demonstrating the ineffectiveness and inequities of the cash bail or fixed bail system, a number of states and local jurisdictions have made efforts to reform their bail practices in recent years, and the data show that bail reform has not led to an increase in crime or recidivism rates. In the state of New York, which instituted bail reform at the beginning of 2020, fixed bail is still used for violent felonies, but for misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies, defendants are released on their own recognizance or under individualized, tailored conditions designed to ensure their appearance in court. 3 separate studies have shown that while crime rates in New York did increase in 2020, as they did throughout the country, Bail reform was not a driver of that increase. One study found that eliminating bail for misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies in New York actually reduced rearrest rates. And of course, in New York, as in the rest of the country, crime has been declining precipitously. The other fundamental problem with this bill is that it imposes an onerous reporting requirement that the Bureau of Justice Statistics, or BJS, will not be able to meet. The bill would require BJS to obtain data from all state courts in the country without defining that term and without recognizing that much of the data that the bill would require BJS to collect is not housed in one central location. To truly fulfill this mandate, BJS would have to go to courts as well as jails and multiple pretrial service agencies in every single jurisdiction in the country to collect the data. This would be nearly impossible without a massive infusion of resources that this bill does not provide. And such a report is not necessary because it is entirely duplicative. As recognized in the findings of this bill, BJS awarded a grant of $2 million to the Research Triangle Institute in 2020 to conduct a study of pretrial release through the National Pretrial Reporting Program, which BJS first initiated in 1988. Although the study was slowed down for years by the pandemic, it is still underway, and BJS anticipates that it will be completed by the end of this year. Rather than imposing an impossible annual burden on BJS without appropriating a single dollar to fund that burden, we should wait for the completion of this ongoing work. Of course, if my colleagues across the aisle really wanted to address violent crime, they could invest in community violence intervention, fully fund the ATF, enact common sense gun legislation, and provide targeted support to law enforcement. Democrats have consistently supported such efforts while Republicans have repeatedly blocked and tried to defund them. Although I am typically inclined to support reporting bills, as are many of my colleagues, I simply cannot support this legislation. Rather than gathering new data and useful data, it creates an unfunded mandate with which BJS cannot possibly comply to launch a misguided attack on bail reform. It's disappointing that Republicans would rather demagogue on the issue of crime than work with Democrats on solutions that would truly make our communities safer. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back without objection. All of the opening statements will be included in the record. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin for the purpose of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I do have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered base text for the purpose of the amendment. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin to explain the amendment.
Well, Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned in my earlier remarks, the last report that was produced by the National Pretrial Reporting Program, it does rely on data that's over 20 years old. So we should not be relying on the outdated statistics to guide the committee's oversight of the federal funds, like the burn JAG, which I talked about earlier. So this amendment is in the nature of a substitute, would make to report annual, giving Congress up-to-date statistics on how state and local prosecutorial decisions are impacting the safety of our communities. This is really the only substantial change, but I do believe that it would respond to some of the concerns that I heard from the other side of the aisle. So I urge the adoption of the amendment in the nature of substitute, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from